Good morning, everybody. My name is Devon Kerr. Who am I? What am I doing here? I don't even know the answer to that at this point in time. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but more importantly, we'll get to the man who you should be listening to begin with. My name is Devon Kerr, featured analyst for the USL Championship, also on ESPN Game of the Week, co-host of the SCCL show covering CONCACAF Champions League, and I moonlight as the co-host of Three Honest Lads, but again, neither here nor there. You've probably heard that before. What you haven't heard before is what's about to come out of the mouth of our main man, Martin Rennie, head coach of Indy 11, who's kind enough to join us. And he broke down the best 11 that he's ever coached against. Now we're going to get to the boys that he's actually coached. Now, he said that he's removed his current players for fear of revolt in the locker room. However, we're going to jump into the past. We're going to have a little fun. Martin Rennie, how you doing, sir?
I'm good, thank you. Good to see you again.
You as well, sir. It's, again, it's a weird world that we live in. And, you know, you were kind enough to dive into your mind and have a little fun with us. And so you said, Devon, how about we do this, we do that? I said, okay. You didn't like the hopscotch tournament idea, and I respect that, but that's okay. So you've given us your best 11 that you've coached against. Now we're going to do who you've coached for. And I want to give everybody a brief journey through your coaching career. As mentioned in the previous chat, only coach to have worked his way through the entire North American pyramid. PDL, NASL, USL, MLS. Oh, by the way, 5 years. At him, he's the man. That's why he gets it done. And the clubs that you've done it with, Martin, I'm going to give everybody a heads up ahead of time. And then you can kind of walk us through why you picked this player, where you had them, and all that kind of stuff. Martin, Cascade Surge, Cleveland City Stars, Carolina Railhawks, now known as North Carolina FC, Vancouver Whitecaps FC. Of course, you ventured over to Korea, Soli Land, and last but not least, Indy 11. So, sir, let's start with your best 11 that you've coached. And a lot of these names for people aren't necessarily, especially in the United States, aren't household names, but they deserve a lot of credit. And there's going to be a kind of a recurring trend here, but we'll get to that. So let's start at the goalkeeping position. YOUNG-KWANG, why there? Because you've had a massive amount of names when I looked at it that have come through at a high level of talent.
Yeah, there's been a lot of good goalkeepers that I've worked with. And of course, there's going to be a couple of players on here that aren't going to be well known to most soccer fans within the United States or football fans in the Western world, because there are a couple of them that are from other continents. But this guy's a fantastic goalkeeper and played quite a lot for the South Korean national team. Really, really good shot stopper, really good with his feet, very good organizer, just very calm, very composed, made lots of saves that won lots of games, very brave goalkeeper. And as you say, there's so many good goalkeepers that I've worked with. David Ousted, when he first came to MLS, did really well. I think he was one of the goalkeepers of the year when he first started. He was someone who I worked with. Joe Cannon had an incredible Major League Soccer career and did incredibly well in his career. Brad Knighton was someone who has continued to play in Major League Soccer and do well. There's been a lot of them, and as you said, not mentioning any of the goalkeepers who I'm currently working with. But this guy overall, I think, was just a higher level. He was the only one maybe that was a national team level player from the guys that I coached, and just very, very high quality player.
Let's jump up to the back line. By the way, I love how the structure of this, when I get it, whether you meant to do it or not, when you did your best 11 that you've coached against, that kind of ran into a 4-4-2-ish type formation, but this looks a little bit more similar to what we see out of your boys in blue on a regular basis, and we look forward to seeing that again soon in the USL Championship. But you go to a back three. DONG-JIN, another one of the Korean accolades that got an opportunity to step in under your tutelage, and you look at him at that left back position, that center back type role over there. Again, so many names over the years, Martin, and it's difficult to pick out only 11. So when you start, did you know that you were going to start with 3 like this, first of all? And then from there, walk us through the back line, whether it's Kim Young, Indy O'Brien, and Jay DEMERIT. Walk us through that from left to right.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily sold on having a back three. I was just trying to think of good players that I've worked with, but it kind of fits well that that's the way that we're playing at the moment, and the players that we have, they fit that system well. So Kim Dong-Jin is not well known here, but he is well known in other parts of the world. He actually probably the height of his career was playing not only for the national team nearly 70 times for South Korea, but played for Zenit St. Petersburg at a time where they were one of the best clubs in Europe. They had Arshavin and so many other incredible players. And they won, you know, the Russian Premier League, Russian Cup, Russian Super Cup, and they won the UEFA Cup, actually beating Rangers in the final. That was in 2008, I believe. And DONG-JIN was a left back or a left centre back who was just an incredible athlete, amazing on the ball, really good at passing, playing through the lines, very good at defending, just all round like a fantastic player, could organise and do his job incredibly well. And naturally good on his left side, which if you're going to play a back three, I think it is hard to find those. We talked about it last time, left-footed centre backs who can do the job, but he was probably the best that I had in that position. Andy O'Brien, probably one of the best just defenders that I've ever worked with. He was really a smart player. He would study the opponent. You know, I would ask him, you know, because he's played against all the top players. And he, you know, for example, Wayne Rooney never scored against him. And I would say, why do you think that was? And he said, well, I would study him just like I'd study every player before I played against him. And I would notice that if I stood on Wayne Rooney's right foot, then he would maybe just have to turn onto his left and play a pass or move back or maybe have a shot on his left. But he was never able to score if I stood just simply on his right foot. So his body was positioned in an area where Rooney could definitely go to his left. This is for an example. And it was just so obvious, but like so simple and so effective. So even if you're out there playing with your friends or you come up against a guy who's, you know, the best player on the field, you can quickly go, right, okay, he's far stronger to his right than his left. So I'm going to just make him constantly, all the time, do everything on his weaker side. Sounds very simple, but is incredibly effective. And he was like that. He was a smart guy. He played under Sir Bobby Robson at Newcastle, played many times for Republic of Ireland, played in the World Cup, really good organizer, big, strong guy, excellent player. And in the centre of a back three, I think he would have been at his absolute best, especially beside someone like Jay DEMERIT, who was just an elite level athlete, like incredible athlete who could play on the right of a back three and could cover the channel, no problem. He was, you know, in Vancouver when I got there, he was the captain. In my second year there, in his first game of the season, he tore his Achilles and was out for the whole season. And that was a major blow for us because our team was actually really good that year. We were scoring a lot of goals, playing a lot of exciting games, but losing goals and definitely not having our probably highest profile defender and our captain for the whole season really was a blow, because in Major League Soccer you can't easily replace him. He takes up part of your salary cap and there's no real opportunities to make amends for that. So again, played a lot for the national team. And so probably those three they've all played more than, I think, 50 times for their national team. Not sure about Jay, but he was probably up there. I think all have played in a World Cup. So again, may not be as well known as Nesta and some of the players we talked about last time, but they are very, very high level players and were great to coach.
How deep do you get into it with your players, Martin? Sometimes you guys, the turnaround for you and your coaching staff, 2, 3, 4 days, and at certain points in time, it gets into the attrition and the physical side of things where you have to take care of your players. How deep do you get into it where those little nuances of a player, of a little turn on the right, a little push to the left, how deep do you get into it with your boys?
Yeah, fairly deep. I mean, I think only if it makes sense. I think sometimes as a coach, you can be trying to see things that maybe aren't there. You see it once and you go, oh, he always does that. But you have to really look at it over time to see trends that are going to actually be useful or helpful to your player. So we definitely try to do that. I remember one time, noticing a goalkeeper was always high off his line and telling, the players, or telling a couple of the players, look, the goalkeeper's always high off his line. See if you get a chance, just chip him. And I remember one of the guys scoring from like 40 yards out with a chip, and it was like it wouldn't have happened unless we had really analysed it, for example. But I think it's important to give good detail, but really you're trying to let the player flow and play to his best, and not to be too concerned about too many details, because sometimes that can get caught in your mind. And you also have to know which players can take the information on board and use it, and which players will it really not really help that much.
Yeah, some of that knit and grit and that overall stuff that we talked about with Thierry Henry as well, just allowing things to progress naturally sometimes. DEMERIT kind of talked about that in a recent article that he did. It's nice to see him a bit more active within the youth ranks. Let's move into the midfield. I'm going to start this time. I'm going to start on the outside and then work our way in. And again, I'm going to allude to a trend here, see if people can start picking it up, but I'm just going to name the two boys. Lee Young-KWANG on the left-hand side, he was actually with you in Vancouver, and Nigel REO-COKER, who, how Americans don't know who this guy is. Some of the ones, I actually had the opportunity to commentate alongside him in the same building, and he walked into the building one day. There were at least 5 people that walked in and said, who is that guy? And my jaw dropped to the floor because of the wondrous things that this guy could do with the ball. Again, usually against Liverpool, but walk me through Young-KWANG and REO-COKER.
So Young-KWANG Lee, or Lee Young-KWANG, incredible player. He's actually played over 120 times for South Korea. He's played in the World Cup the semi-final of the World Cup when it was in South Korea. He played for Tottenham. He played for Borussia Dortmund. He played for PSV Eindhoven. Like, just unbelievable player, unbelievable person. I once went out with him to watch a game in Korea when I was there, and I have never, ever seen anybody be treated as such a star as I saw him. You couldn't move. You couldn't get to your car. You couldn't get to your seat in the stadium. It was honestly incredible. I've never seen anybody with that much star power. Everywhere we went with this guy, airports in any city in the United States, people would run up to him for, Koreans. When we signed him, the day before we announced him, there was literally, hundreds of South Koreans in the hotel that he was staying in. They'd found out he was there. And again, not well known necessarily in the Western world as much, although obviously he played at the highest level in Europe, so people do know him. But in Asia, he is a superstar. And he was just such a natural player, could flow left or right, and was just so reliable, fantastic. We played him a lot on the right, but I've got him on here on our left. REO-COKER on the right, he hated playing on the right. He hated playing right back. He's a central midfielder. But I honestly believe that if he had stuck to being, if he played on the right more, he would have played for England and been a top player for England. I know that he would have had competition probably at that time from maybe Gary Neville, but he was so powerful. He had such a low centre of gravity. Once he got running with the ball, you couldn't stop him. And I know that in the Premier League in England, he played right back sometimes even against Ronaldo and shut him down and did really well. He was so athletic, could change direction so well. But as I say, he really was more of a central midfielder. He played, I think, 25 times for the England under-21 team. He was the captain of the under-21 team and probably should have even done more as a national team player for England. But I think he was just a little bit below playing to maximising his career as some guys did. Like DEMERIT, he got everything he could out of it. REO-COKER maybe just didn't get quite everything he could. And if he did, he would have been a much bigger name. All those people in that room that you talked about would have known exactly who he was. But he was a very good player. And again, in that position on the right, I think he just dominated that side physically.
I gave you this analogy talking about Nesta and forgetting that he came to the United States in Montreal. Same thing in that instance with Nigel, where when he walked into the room and I was kind of talking to people and it came out of my mouth. And of course, the English national team, one of our producers who's from England, I believe she's a Huddersfield girl. She was like, he never capped for the men's national team. Just like that, she knew right in front of me. And I had to go back and look and I said, oh my God, he never made a senior cap. And that was kind of astonishing to me. But again, the level of talent, it's very difficult to top. Let's move to the engine room and your boys in the middle, one of which I had an opportunity to train with. The other is going to be a bit of an unknown, not just to me, but to almost anyone. But let's start with Adam Moffat, who kind of every single level within the United States pyramid. His time with you at the Cleveland City Stars is obviously why you picked him there. But, the Portland Timbers, Houston Dynamo, most recently the Cosmos, the Sacramento Republic, one of the nicer human beings that you can meet. Heard he got into commentating, by the way, so don't take my job, Adam. But why Adam Moffat?
Right. So in that position, there's actually a lot of good players that I've coached that could arguably be in there. Some of them even quite high-profile guys who've had a lot of success. But Adam is someone who I actually brought him over to the United States. He was playing semi-professional soccer in Scotland for a very small club called Elgin City. And he was very young. He was maybe, I think, around 19. No one obviously knew who he was. And it was our first year in Cleveland as an expansion team. We really didn't have, you know, a budget or anything like that. You know, players were staying with host families and just playing because they loved it, but also playing because we convinced them we would try and help them move up in their career. And in that team in Cleveland, believe it or not, in our expansion year, in the entire season, we only lost one game. So the whole season long, it was amazing. We only lost one. And actually, in that one game, I had him on the bench because, as you remember back in those days, sometimes on a Friday you would play and then play on a Saturday. So you had to try and rotate a little bit. And he went on in that game and scored a goal. The game we lost 1-0 and it got disallowed. So actually, I honestly feel like that whole season was an unbeaten season. But in that year, he was a midfielder who worked hard, box to box, got around the field, but he also scored for us quite a lot. So there was lots of games where we were very close, 0-0, and he would get a goal and we would win 1-0. And then he went on and he went to Columbus Crew. And what you notice in his career was he won a lot. He won the MLS Cup at Columbus, and he won the Supporter Shield at Columbus. He won conference titles at Houston, and so on and so forth. So he did actually have a lot of success, and that's partly because of the kind of player he was. He was a winner, and he covered ground. He was strong. He was powerful. And so part of it as well is that in midfield, I like to have a couple of guys who can cover ground, who can win balls, who can do things simply. And if you do look at Adam Moffat's career, you'll see some unbelievable goals that he scored, like absolute rippers of goals from way far out, especially I think for Houston, but for other clubs as well. So really nice to see him getting into the next phase of his career in the commentary. I'm sure he'll do well. Maybe not as good as you, but I'm sure he'll do a great job.
I appreciate it. Yeah, he deep runs in the Open Cup as well, and yeah, Adam Moffat, again, a true professional. Anybody that had the opportunity to either meet or play alongside him only has the highest regard. This one took me back, and you talked about so many different players. I know people can't see it, but I'll start talking about it a little bit. I've got my own little list going on right here of guys that I thought you would have put in, some of which fall under that, okay, they're still on the team. So we'll get there in a minute. But Musa Otieno, in the middle of the field, I had never even heard of him. And then I start going back and looking at his background, and I say, okay, well, yeah, he could play a little bit, but still a Kenyan that it's not like he was a well-known global player that ended up for you under 1 year and then he went somewhere else. How did he make his way into this mix? Because as you mentioned, there are a bunch of guys on my list over here that I felt like would have come in front of him.
You know, honestly, I think he might be the best player that I ever coached. This guy was 6'6". He was unbelievable player. He was like Yaya Toure, and he played over, I think, 120 times for the Kenyan national team. In Kenya, he is an absolute legend, but he just never got out. It's incredible that he didn't, but he just never got out. And at the end of his career, through friends and connections, he ended up coming and playing for me in Cleveland just for a real short space of time. But we would follow the statistics on things like his possession, and game after game after game, and I have never ever seen this before, and I've never ever seen it since. He was 100% possession effective. He never gave the ball away. But he was 6'6", so he won every ball in the air. He would score on set plays. He could defend easily. He was an incredible leader. It's really a travesty that this guy wasn't one of the top players in Europe. That's my honest opinion. Somehow he just didn't get out. Maybe sometimes I feel like, from what I've heard, things happened with his contracts where he was tricked into things and didn't get to be free and didn't get to leave for a reasonable price. And he was incredible leader, incredible player. Absolutely, in my opinion, could have played at the very, very highest level. And I'm talking, you know, I'm going through many names who have played at the very, very highest level. And I wouldn't say it lightly, but I think he might be the best of all of them. That's,
again, getting an opportunity to dive into your background, all the players that you've coached against, all the players that you've coached. That's a pretty bold statement coming from you. And again, I respect you, so I'm gonna have to go pick up some tape on him, because it's funny. You hear stuff about players like that, right? Sometimes where it's just like luck of the draw, things didn't fall their way, and this is one of those guys, especially from what you're saying, that people got to see him.
Yeah, if you look back, you could look at on YouTube when Cleveland City Stars, we won the championship there. Must have been 2008, and I think he scored one of the goals, maybe the second goal, and it was a header that was basically harder than most people could kick it. It was like the ball came in from a throw-in, and he smacked it so hard it would, the net wasn't there; it would still be going. And he could just, honestly, he could do it all, and that was at the end of his career. So I shudder to think what he was in his prime.
Back-to-back Coach of the Year awards for our man Martin Rennie. 3 players left. I'm going to move to Kenny Miller. People who with the Scottish background will recognize the name. Friends that have been in and out of the Partick Thistle program. I knew of him before that when he was actually at Rangers. I think that was in 2008 and 9-10 or 9-10-11, somewhere in that area. Kenny Miller, but another guy that you had an opportunity to be around in your time when he was at Vancouver. A good player, very good player. And for me, like on the attacking side of things, maybe kind of a Swiss Army knife type thing where you could move him here and there, but so effective in the final third.
Yeah, I mean, Kenny's the player out of all the ones I've coached who maximized his potential. He's just finished playing at the age of 40. And his career, honestly, for people who don't know, he played for both Rangers and Celtic, which is...
That doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. There's Maurice Johnston really was one guy. But that takes an incredible amount of mental strength to do that. It's like two of the most heated, the rivalry between those two teams is just incredible. So anyway, he played for both of those teams. He played for Scotland, I think, around 70 times and often played up front on his own, scored some incredible goals, including I think one of his last ones was against England at Wembley. But he, like you say, he could play a few positions. His movement was very good. He was an extremely hard worker, and he made other players around him better because of what he would do. I think at one point he won the award for the highest goal scorer in Europe. So he's a very, very good player. He's had a lot of success, extremely competitive, and yeah, like if he would, like in the lineup that I'm putting together here, he's the kind of guy that would figure out what he needed to do so the team could win. So if it meant him having to drop a little deeper, he would do that. If it meant him running in the channels, he would do that. If it meant him pressing people more, he would do that. He's one of those guys that knew what it was, would do what was ever required to win the game. And if he scored, he was happy. But if he didn't, as long as the team won, he was good with that.
And you pair him next to CAMILO. CAMILO, for me, I thought this was a brilliant choice because I've seen him a lot, actually, and especially with his time with Querétaro. I believe he's with Tijuana now, and actually looking now, I see it. And so, again, another Vancouver player, but a Brazilian who might be, in terms of looking at your list, I don't want to say the most underrated because I don't necessarily think that Korean players get their fair credit, but to me, he might be the most underrated just because of all the leagues that he's played in, all the countries, different levels. But the consistency is still there. And it's not just consistent. He's usually rising to another level when he plays in it. So for me, I understood the choice. But you pair him next to Kenny Miller, that's got to be a match made in heaven for you.
Yeah, they actually did play together. And I think that was a key factor in Camilo's development as a player because, again, Kenny would sometimes make runs that would take defenders away so that Camilo was free. That was the kind of selflessness that he had. But Camilo, when I first went to Vancouver, he played more on the left and he wasn't quite fit enough to do that as well as we needed him to. But we worked with him a lot and he developed so much. He became a central striker for us. And in the 2013 season, I believe he was Major League Soccer's highest goal scorer. I think he scored 23 goals that year, which is an incredible feat when you think about the players he was playing against, the other strikers that were in the league. He did incredibly well scoring on free kicks, scoring spectacular goals, could beat people, could score the simple finish, had an eye for goal. But just, yeah, overall, like a really good striker, really good finisher, very dangerous with shots outside the box. And again, any team to be successful, you have to have people who can put the ball in the net. And with those two and the other one that we'll talk about, I'm very confident we would have been able to do that with this team.
Well, let's finish it off. Year 11 up top, which outside of Musso Tieno in the middle, obviously go back. We got to look at YouTube. We got to pick up some tape of him and get some eyes on him. MIN-KYU. Again, your time in Korea, you put him at the top of your pyramid of sorts. And the pick, I kind of turn my head a little bit. I go back. Again, probably one of those players that got to see it to believe it, right?
Yeah. It's an incredible story with him. So one of the things is, if you look at this team, really the only players that I ever inherited at any club were DEMERIT and CAMILO. All the rest I had to find and sign and put in the team. And when I went to Korea, it was an expansion team, so there was no players. So I've actually built an expansion team twice and taken over two teams a year or so after they expanded. And also in Indy 11, really it was taking over an expansion team. So all my career has really been based on like having to build a team from nothing or take over a team that was not doing well. Like Indy 11 were the worst team in the league when I took over. Vancouver were the worst team in the league when I took over. So it's always been a case of trying to build something, build a culture, build a structure, and get it moving. And so Korea was like that. And so I was going around, I was scouting the whole country at every level, looking at all the players. And this guy, MIN-KYU, was a deep-lying central midfielder. But I was looking at him and I was thinking like he could potentially become a good striker, like a target player who's very strong. Turned out he was probably one of the physically strongest guys I've ever worked with. And so I was meeting with these players, trying to get them to sign for our team. And I remember meeting with him, and he had a lot of other offers to be, to go as a defensive midfielder, but not at a real high level. And I said to him, look, I think if you've played as a striker, it could change your life. And I'd be willing to work with you and see if we could make it happen. And if you stay as a central midfielder, I think you'll do fine, but you'll never really change your life and change your income or change your where you're going. So he reached over, shook my hand, and said he would do it. And we brought him in. And in the first 20 games of the season, he scored 22 goals. He'd never played as a striker before, but he was incredible. He went into the national team squad. He was in the all-star team for the K-League. He moved up to one of the biggest clubs. He went from making a very small salary to like now a huge salary. He's incredible with his back to goal, amazing at putting players in. Like, so if you play him the ball, he's like got that ability to see the pass, give the weight of pass, set other players up, can hold the ball up against any defender, but can also score from all over the place. And if you typed in MIN-KYU into YouTube, some of the goals you would see, you would be astounded at what he does and what he has done. And so it's just an incredible story of, like, as a coach, what you're trying to do is help people fulfill their potential. And with some of these guys, I feel like I helped them. I feel like I helped Adam. I feel like I helped CAMILO. I feel like I helped MIN-KYU, and saw them really become better than they were when I started working with them. And hopefully there's been quite a lot of players like that. Of course, not all, but quite a few. And he was the one that probably improved the most in the shortest space of time. And his life literally changed. He went from, fairly low amount of money to like life-changing money, and he now plays for one of the biggest clubs in Asia. And has so much has changed for him. But if you had him with Kenny Miller and CAMILO running off them, running behind them, it would be so hard to play against, because you'd have guys who can get behind, guys who can come short to get the ball, and players wide who could put balls into the box, midfielders who could cover the ground. And then if you did lose the ball, you would have defenders who could put the fires out themselves. And then if it did come to that, goalkeeping, then I think we've got a guy who could make saves there. So again, with some of the Korean players, people don't really know a lot about Korean soccer, but the standard there was incredible. Like, I would watch high school teams beat the youth teams of Barcelona, the youth teams of Borussia Dortmund. Like, not just beat them, but really hammer them. And
wow.
This, honestly, like, if they had a little bit more in terms of their creativity and their goal scoring, I reckon that South Korea would consistently get to where they got to in the 2002 World Cup, which was the semi-final. I think that they're at that level. Their ability on the ball, their professionalism, their defending, their tactical understanding, it's just way, way beyond what I thought it was. And when I look at Asian football, I think, oh, well, small guys and so on. But in Korea, they're big, powerful, strong, athletic guys. South Korea, Japan, the standard of those two countries is just so much higher than people realize. And I was honestly blown away by the level in the K-League.
So you actually kind of just led me into my final two questions. The first one is going to be about your time in Korea, because the structure that's there. I have friends that have played in Asia, and they talk about how it's a culture thing that kind of the gap is bridged in every part of your life. And that year, I'm looking at it right now, South Korea, United States, Portugal, Poland, that's not an easy group in 2002. But even once they are able to get out of it, and not just get out of the group, they win the group 7 points. Their knockout games, they beat Italy, they beat Spain, and then also Germany 1-0, and Germany lost in the final. They ended up losing to Turkey in the third place game. But Jason Clark, Kim Ho, there are a lot of guys in global football. You talk about the Man Uniteds that have played for the biggest teams in the history of the world football. What was your time like there where you get a culture like that? How did it impact you as a person? How did it impact your coaching style and maybe bring some of that back to the United States when you made that decision?
You know, honestly, that's probably a podcast in and of itself, or an interview in and of itself. That, you know, we could talk about that for at least 20 minutes, half an hour. But what I would say is there are hundreds of Jae-Sung Parks in Korea, hundreds of them. And I'm not kidding. Like, there's so many good players that in that country. And it's so undertapped because people don't really know how to navigate it. It's very difficult to navigate. And it's also there's a lot more money there in the football than people think. So like, you get a player who's a prospect, but he's making like a lot of money there. It doesn't make sense for him financially to leave. So it's a very, very complicated place. But you know what, honestly, I'd be up for talking about it in more detail, because I think that people would be fascinated by the way the structure is, the impact that structure has on the style of play, the impact that structure has on the individual personalities of the players, how professional they are, all of those things. And then also what the downsides of that can be. Because there's always, with any system, there's pros and cons. So I'd be really interested to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I picked your brain a little bit on it, but to really dive deep into it, like you said, we probably need a bit more time than we have left. I do have time for one more question, and then we can start contract negotiations about future discussions. And it's going to involve my boys right here that were not on the list. So I got to include these guys only because you said it didn't involve your current staff, or excuse me, current squad. But these are some of the boys I call my honorable mention list that didn't necessarily make your 11. A couple of them, people are going to have no clue. One of which I had to look back into. And once the bell got rung, and I actually reached out to one of my friends who was involved with the Railhawks, he gave me a heads up. I'm going to name a couple. You decide one or two that you want to chat about, and we'll go from there, and we'll get you out of here, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Floyd Franks. Followed you pretty much at every single stop. Matt Watson. I'm pretty sure Indy 11 fans know who he is. Brett Russon's still in there. June Marquez Davidson, one of the more underrated players that have ever played in the United States, in my opinion, whether it be MLS, USL, or the championship. And the three final guys, Jordan Harvey, Daigo Kobayashi, and Iose. Do you have any comment on any of those? And again, I understand some of them still play for you, but maybe why they didn't make the list?
Yeah, obviously the ones that you mentioned that are on our current team, I didn't want to include any of those. Honestly, there's even beyond those names, there's so many others. Etienne Barbara was one of the best players in he was the MVP of the NASL. He was a top goal scorer. He scored all the time. And just as he got to that peak, he got injured and didn't really get to progress. He was, a guy who I think could have gone on and done amazingly well. But there's so many of those guys. There's, especially if you look at the USL kind of level, NASL level, guys like Johnny Steele, Daniel Palladini, Josh Gardner, Capono Lowe. Like, I don't want to, Greg Shields was a guy who played in the Premier League in England and played for me in Carolina. Stephen Glass, who's a coach in the league now. Yeah. Alan Shearer said that he was the best crosser of a ball that he ever played with in his career. And he played at Newcastle. And he played with me in Carolina. Paul Ritchie was in Carolina for a little while. He played at the highest level with Manchester City, Hearts, Bolton, Rangers, Scotland. So there's a whole bunch of guys, and you always are leaving out. And even now, I'm not mentioning guys who I know are very good. But at the same time, you have to pick 11, and that's actually always one of the hardest things for any coach from week to week is picking your team, because you're leaving out other guys who are very deserving of the opportunity to play. And I think that how you communicate that and how you work through that can make or break your team and make or break your season, because you have to try and give everyone a fair chance, and you have to respect them all, but you can only pick 11. So that's basically what I've walked into with this team, with my actual real job coaching, and with the group of players that I've coached against. You can only pick 11.
Martin, I can't even begin to thank you personally, but I think, most importantly, let's, say thank you to the fans and the viewers. Stay safe, stay positive. Though we don't have the opportunity to watch your team in action right now, we appreciate your time of, letting us pick your brain of the best 11 that you've coached against, the best 11 in your mind that have played for you, excluding guys that are currently on your squad. And we look forward to talks with you in the future. Thank you very much, my friend, and we'll speak to you soon.
You're welcome. Good to speak to you again. Thank you.